I've got no idea. Is this thing on? Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I'm Mick, your host with the most to start your girlfriends and your wives. You can follow me on X Twitter at Movies TV Mad and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad X. On Snapchat, BMouth60, Mick, your host with the most, and on TikTok, Mad Mickey's World, because it's all my crazy world as far as I'm concerned. World domination is my ambition. As part of the build-up to James Gunn's Superman releasing this very year on July the 11th, I want to talk about what we're going to do now and again is talk about different pieces of Superman media. And today we're going to talk about Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. Now, I always, when I broach the subject of Bryan Singer and Superman Returns, I always have a disclaimer. I know exactly what the man's accused of, and him being a director is one thing, and the other stuff he did is nothing to do with me, so that's away from me. But I am allowed to talk about him. I'm not scared to talk about him or his films. And today we're talking about Superman Returns as part of the build-up to James Gunn's Superman releasing July the 11th. So, first of all, let's get the elephant out of the room. Superman Returns was absolutely a flop. On a 250 million budget, it brought back around 350 million. Basically 100 million more than what they spent, but don't forget there would have been marketing as well and other costs. So Superman Returns basically didn't make any money. So Bryan Singer came to prominence with The Usual Suspects, starring at the time really an unknown Kevin Spacey. It's a brilliant indie movie, and this launches his career. So all of a sudden, he's making an X-Men movie, and then he made a sequel as well. X-Men 1 and X-Men 2 are two of the best comic book movies ever made. There's an argument to say that X2 may be the best comic book movie ever made. I know that's a controversial statement. Bryan Singer, as a director, what should I call him? A mad genius? That's what we're going to call him. He's a mad genius. Great director. Forget about the other stuff, but a great director. And at the time, before I knew anything about the bad stuff, he was a hero of mine. And X and X2 are up there with the best. X-Men 2 is absolutely up there with Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. X2 may be better than The Dark Knight, if you ask me. Again, another controversial statement. Now, Bryan Singer, like many directors from his generation, were obsessed with Superman 78 and Richard Donner. In fact, the director and that movie were the reason that they became directors. He heard that Brett Ratner was directing a Superman movie. So he created a situation where Ratner would direct X-Men 3 because he wanted off the property so he could direct that Superman movie, and Bryan Singer got his way. So all of a sudden, he was directing a Superman movie. And he wanted to write a love letter to Superman 78. Now, as we talk about these different, when we do these different videos and we talk about these different pieces of Superman media, so we can mark the occasion of this year's brand new Superman film, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, what went right, and what went wrong. Superman Returns is an amalgamation of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, it's shocking to me when I think about Superman Returns with what went wrong with the film when you think about X-Men and X-Men 2. The perfect storm for Bryan Singer. You talk to any Marvel fan and they'll tell you, basically, that there's not a movie in the MCU that comes anywhere near to X or X2. As far as I'm concerned, and as far as many, especially X-Men fans, and Feige is looking to create an X-Men universe, a brand new X-Men universe within the MCU. He isn't ever going to get close to the castings that Singer was able to do or the films he was able to make. Then he came back after Superman Returns, and it was his idea to do X-Men First Class. He got another director, Matthew Vaughn, to do it, but it was his idea. Singer absolutely nailed it when it came to X-Men. But there were a lot of problems with Superman Returns. The idea of Superman Returns was to make a sequel to Superman 2. A crazy idea, but because I grew up with those films, with the Christopher Reeve films, I was really hyped and excited. And during the build-up to Superman Returns, Bryan Singer spoke a good game, as these directors always do. And how can I compare this? Basically, it's like Star Trek 2009. Although it's part of an alternate universe, the original Star Trek cast and characters existed. The old Star Trek exists. That's why we see Leonard Nimoy in Star Trek 2009. It tells you that universe happened and that Star Trek happened. But I think the better comparison is Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is basically a sequel to the original Karate Kid franchise, and to me it probably is the best sequel series ever made. The best sequel ever made. Cobra Kai is immense. Cobra Kai is an immense achievement, but that's what Bryan Singer was attempting to do with Superman Returns. And let's be clear, Superman Returns was no Cobra Kai. But as I say, it's a movie with great moments. That's not a good movie. So it's a bad movie with great moments, if you ask me. I rewatch it all the time. I love it. But one of the biggest problems with, if you compare Superman Returns with Cobra Kai brings back many, many cast members from the original movie series. Well, basically, Superman Returns is unrecognizable to the Dick Donner aesthetic, the Richard Lester aesthetic, right? Basically, it doesn't even look like the Donnerverse. And if you're doing a sequel to a movie from the Donnerverse, it has to look like the Donnerverse. The Daily Planet looks nothing like the Donnerverse. And this is really big problematic kind of continuity errors in the movie. For example, right, the premise of Superman Returns is that he's been off-world for 5 years because an astronomer that Lex Luthor paid tells Superman that Krypton may have survived and may have not been destroyed. So this makes Superman want to go to outer space and look for Krypton. But it's a plan from Lex Luthor to distract him. So when his parole hearing comes up, that Superman's not there as a witness. Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor is Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor. He's in prison because of what happened in Superman 2. So he gets rid of Superman. He gets him to go in space. Now, that's the first mistake. We've got to see this stuff. We've got to see Lex Luthor do this stuff. We've got to see Lex Luthor manipulate this. We've got to see Lex Luthor in prison. We don't see any of this stuff. So there's no build-up to the premise of this movie. We should see Superman recreate his spaceship, because we do get that beautiful return to Krypton sequence that we never saw in the film. Big mistake. The synopsis to this film is from the depths of the ocean to the far reaches of outer space. Well, you've cut out the far reaches of outer space, so your synopsis makes no bloody sense, does it? So that's another problem. You look at the Fortress of Solitude. Basically looks nothing like the design, a wonderful design from John Barry that he designed in Superman 78. As I say, the Daily Planet looks nothing like the Donnerverse Daily Planet. It's only been 5 years in fictional terms. So it's not, the gap between Superman Returns and, Superman 2 is about, probably 30 years or so. But in terms of fictional time, right, it's only 5 years. So basically everything should pretty much look the same. Now, when Clark's in the Daily Planet and he sees the article, Why the World Doesn't Need Superman, Brandon Routh is wearing his brand new costume. Well, that's done. If it's a sequel to Superman 2, that picture's before Superman leaves to go looking for Krypton. So he should be wearing the Christopher Reeve costume. So another continuity error there. Also, in Superman 2, they do these prequel credits where we see what happened in Superman 78. This is what they should have done. for the opening credits for Superman Returns. They should have either had Brandon Routh and the other cast members do the stuff that the original cast members were doing in Superman 2 over the credits, or they should have actually just showed us the original Superman 2 clips of it and what happened, considering it's supposed to be a sequel to Superman 2. What's utterly very, very interesting here is that it's not really a sequel to Superman 2, right? It's certainly not a sequel tonally. They only use one storyline from Superman 2, and it's when Lois and Superman make love. That's when he's supposed to make her pregnant, I'm assuming, with Jason, who is the little kid in Superman Returns. Mistake number 3. You see, Singer's not a comic book fan. He didn't get into making comic book movies because he grew up being a fan. So he probably knew nothing about Connor Kent, Superboy. Instead of doing the whole Jason thing, he could have done the Connor Kent thing. He could have had Lex Luthor take his DNA and Superman's DNA and create Connor Kent. And that would have been a more exciting direction. So that, for me, was another mistake. The next mistake for Superman Returns is it's a 2006 movie with 1980s pacing. You simply cannot do that. So when you look at Cobra Kai and the amazing things it does, it continues storylines that were set up, in the original 80s movies, where Superman Returns, it's about, as I say, it's so many different things. It's a love letter to Dick Donner's 1978. It's supposed to be a continuation of Superman 2, and it barely isn't that anyway. And then it's trying to do something different. Kevin Spacey claims when playing Lex Luthor, he was taking on more of what Michael Rosenbaum was doing on Smallville than Gene Hackman. Michael Rosenbaum had become everyone's favourite Lex Luthor. And I suppose what Gene Hackman did at that point, thanks to Michael Rosenbaum's performance being so great and Gotham Miller's kind of creative conceit about what Lex should be, I think it just made Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor kind of old and dated. I still think Gene Hackman was a great Lex Luthor, and it was the right direction to go at that time. But things get outdated when something more deeper, and saying with more depth. And Michael Rosenbaum's Lex has got a lot more depth. I mean, basically, Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor doesn't have any depth to it, if we're being honest. But it was a Lex Luthor I enjoyed watching as a kid, and I'm not going to start crapping all over that. Ultimately, Superman Returns has some really great visual moments, like the bullet in the eye, but then it has some very, very bad unfinished CGI, like some really bad flying sequences near the end. But there's also some great visual moments. The plane, when Superman's trying to save the aeroplane, it's amazing, and they're giving Superman physical problems. Just because he's Superman, it doesn't mean he's still got to battle with physics. And when he's trying to save that plane, he's battling with physics. So as I say, the music, John Ottman's music, is probably one of the best comic book movie scores I have ever heard. So this film is an amalgamation of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not enough people were interested in this movie. Now, WB desperately wanted Tom Welling to play Superman, either in the Brett Ratner movie or the Bryan Singer movie. I think it probably was for the Brett Ratner version of that movie, but Tom couldn't do it because of the scheduling of Smallville. Here's the thing. Probably Smallville should have only went for 5 years. They could have spun off into a Superman movie series, because Smallville was a bit of a problem to Superman Returns, because Smallville was so popular. I mean, Superman and Lois was kind of popular, but Smallville was huge. People were seeing Tom Welling as Superman. They were seeing Michael Rosenbaum as the definitive Lex Luthor, Erica Durant as the definitive Lois Lane. So it probably would have been better if they spun Smallville, they finished the Smallville story and spun it off to this movie universe. And I think that was where they went wrong. And I think that maybe James Gunn's Superman, regrettably, may have a lot in common with Superman Returns.